A 16th century map correctly charts a continent buried under miles of ice. This video explores 30 ancient maps that hold impossible knowledge, revealing lands long before their recorded discovery. You will gain a new framework for understanding human history, one where exploration may have happened in cycles we have forgotten. How could a medieval scholar draw the rivers of Antarctica? What secret voyages were erased from our textbooks? These are not just old drawings. They are coded messages from the past, challenging the official story of how our world was mapped. Each one is a piece of a puzzle that suggests our ancestors knew far more about the planet than we ever credited them for. We will examine charts from Turkish admirals, Korean scholars, and Egyptian surveyors, each adding a layer to a global mystery. By the end, you will see history not as a straight line but as a tapestry with missing threads. What does it mean when the old maps seem to know more than the mapmakers themselves? In a quiet library in Istanbul, a forgotten piece of parchment changed everything. It was 1929, and scholars were cataloging the old imperial archives when they unfurled a large, beautifully drawn map from the year 1513. Its creator was the Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis. In the margins, he wrote notes explaining that he had compiled this chart from many sources, including what he called very old maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. At first glance, it was a remarkable document of its era, showing the known world with impressive detail. But as researchers looked closer, a chill ran down their spines. There, at the southern edge of the Atlantic Ocean, was a landmass that should not have been on any 16th century chart. It depicted a coastline with bays, rivers, and inlets. Modern analysis would later suggest this was the coastline of Queen Maud Land, a region of Antarctica. The impossible detail was that this coastline was drawn free of its immense ice sheet, a condition that, according to geological evidence, last existed over 6,000 years ago. How could Piri Reis, or the ancient sources he consulted, have known what lay beneath miles of glacial ice millennia before the official discovery of the continent in 1820? The debate ignited immediately. Some scholars argued it was a misdrawn version of the Patagonian coast, stretched and distorted. Others pointed to the admiral's own notes, which spoke of consulting charts from the libraries of Constantinople that were themselves copies of far older surveys. The map's accuracy in other areas is startling, featuring the Atlantic coasts of Europe, Africa, and the Americas with a precision that seems to leap ahead of its time. This single artifact, the Piri Reis map, forces a profound question. Is it a cartographic fluke, a lucky error, or is it a fragment, a surviving copy of a copy, from a lost age of global exploration whose records have otherwise turned to dust? It stands as our first and perhaps most famous gateway into this mystery, proving that the past sometimes holds maps to places we have only just begun to remember. The Piri Reis map was not a solitary anomaly. Just over a decade later, another scholar working thousands of miles away produced a chart that deepened the mystery exponentially. In 1531, the French mathematician and royal cartographer Oronteus Finaeus presented a world map of breathtaking ambition. At its southern extreme, he drew a vast, recognizable landmass. It was Antarctica, depicted not as a vague, mythical southern land, but with a shockingly accurate coastline. The contours of the continent are clearly defined, matching modern seismic surveys of the land beneath the ice. Even more astonishing, the interior of this land is not blank. Finaeus filled it with detailed mountain ranges and, most perplexingly, rivers flowing from central highlands to the sea. This is a portrait of Antarctica as a living, temperate continent, a place free of its 2-mile-thick glacial shroud. For such detail to appear on a map from the 16th century is quite simply inexplicable by conventional history. The map's accuracy extends to a subtle but critical feature, a suggested land connection between the southern tip of South America and this Antarctic continent. This aligns with geological evidence that such a bridge may have existed tens of millions of years ago, during the epoch of the supercontinent Gondwana. So we are faced with a paradox. Oronteus Finaeus could not have sailed there. No explorer of his era even suspected the continent's true form. The only logical conclusion scholars can propose is that he, like Piri, Reis, was working from far older source maps. These would be charts drafted by an unknown civilization that walked the river valleys and mapped the mountains of Antarctica during a warm period in the distant past, a period that ended over 6,000 years ago. The precision of these two separate maps, created by men in different countries with different sources, transforms a curious oddity into a compelling pattern. It suggests a forgotten chapter of human exploration, one so ancient its records survive only as ghostly traces in later copies. If such advanced knowledge of the frozen South existed, then what did these lost explorers know about the rest of the world? The trail of impossible maps now leads us away from the ice and toward the lush, uncharted coasts of the Americas. While the southern maps challenged history with their icy secrets, a different mystery was brewing in the stormy waters of the North Atlantic. Two Venetian brothers, Niccolo and Antonio Zeno, claimed to have undertaken a perilous voyage in the late 1300s, sailing far beyond the known boundaries of Europe. Decades after their journey, a descendant published a book containing their letters and, most intriguingly, a map of the lands they described. The Zeno Map, dated to around 1380, is a cartographic riddle wrapped in accusations of fraud. It shows a cluster of strange islands with names like Friesland and Estetiland, places that do not appear on any modern chart and are often dismissed as medieval fantasy. Yet, nestled within this apparent fiction is a startlingly accurate depiction of Greenland. Its coastline is rendered not as a vague blob, but with a shape that closely matches the landmass we know today, including the distinct indentations of its eastern and southern fjords. This accuracy is deeply problematic for the standard historical timeline. How could Venetian sailors from the 14th century have mapped Greenland with such precision, centuries before its detailed exploration? Some researchers go further, suggesting that Estetiland, described in the accompanying text as a rich land to the west, might be a garbled account of Newfoundland or even the North American mainland. The debate around the map is fierce. Skeptics argue it was a clever 16th century forgery created to bolster certain territorial claims, cobbled together from earlier, genuine sources and pure invention. Proponents, however, point to specific nautical details and the consistent internal logic of the brothers' narrative, which describes sailing routes and encounters that align with real North Atlantic geography. Whether a genuine artifact of pre-Columbian exploration or a brilliant historical hoax, the Zeno Map serves a crucial purpose in our investigation. It forces us to confront the blurred line between myth and reconnaissance. In an age when mapmakers often filled empty spaces with legends and sea monsters, how do we separate artistic license from genuine, first-hand observation? The map suggests that even if the Zeno brothers' own story was embellished, it may have been layered upon a foundation of real and very early geographic knowledge of the far north. This pattern of impossible detail preserved within a questionable framework becomes a recurring theme, guiding us from the Atlantic's foggy frontiers to the vast, open expanse of an even greater ocean. The intellectual puzzle of Antarctica took another strange turn 2 centuries later, not from a sailor's log but from a scholar's desk. In 1737, the French geographer Philippe Buache presented a map that was, by all accounts, a work of pure theory. At a time when the southern oceans were still a vast blank labeled Terra Australis Incognita, Buache used reports from earlier explorers and his own ideas about geographic symmetry to propose what the unknown continent might look like. His published map is a fascinating blend of cautious guesswork and bold, almost prophetic imagination. He drew Antarctica not as a single landmass, but as two large islands, separated by a wide, frozen sea channel that ran from the center of the continent down to the sea. For over 200 years, this was seen as an interesting historical footnote, the speculative musings of a brilliant but landlocked cartographer. Then, in the mid-20th century, modern technology began to peel back the ice. Seismic surveys and radar began mapping the actual bedrock of Antarctica, revealing the continent's true shape beneath its glacial blanket. What they found was startling. The ancient continent is, in fact, comprised of two major landmasses. East Antarctica is a single, massive geological shield, while West Antarctica is a collection of smaller islands, all buried under the same ice. Between them lies a deep, subglacial trench. When you compare Buache's theoretical map to these modern subterranean contours, the resemblance is uncanny. His central sea channel aligns almost perfectly with the location of the massive, ice-filled basin that divides the two land regions. How could an 18th-century academic, working from fragmentary ship logs and philosophical principles, have so closely approximated a truth hidden under miles of solid ice? The coincidence is so profound it begs for an explanation beyond luck. Some researchers propose a tantalizing possibility. Perhaps Buache's reasoning was not purely theoretical. As the royal geographer of France, he had access to some of the oldest archives and map collections in Europe. Is it possible that his elegant hypothesis was subtly guided, even unconsciously, by glancing at far older source material? He might have seen charts so ancient their origins were forgotten, their details dismissed as legend, yet their core geographic truths quietly informed his scientific deductions. The Buache map represents a different kind of evidence. It is not a sailor's direct copy of an ancient chart, but perhaps an intellectual echo of one. It shows how lost knowledge might survive not as a precise drawing, but as a ghostly shape that influences later minds, guiding theory toward a reality it should not have been able to see. This blurring of line between scholarly deduction and inherited memory pushes our search even further back in time, to maps that predate not only Columbus but the very empires of Europe. Just 5 years after Oronteus Finaeus published his polar projection, another map emerged from the vibrant printing houses of Venice that turned its gaze to the opposite side of the world. In 1559, an Ottoman cartographer named Hadji Ahmed released a world map of startling geometric clarity. At first glance, its almost artistic, angular style might seem like an abstraction, a decorative interpretation of a world still being discovered. But a closer study of its depiction of the Pacific coast of the Americas reveals details that freeze the mind. The map shows Alaska not as an isolated island, but clearly connected to the continent of Asia by a slender land bridge. This is the Bering Strait region, and while the connection is drawn as solid land, its placement and form are unmistakable. This geographic relationship, a theory debated by scholars for centuries, would not be scientifically confirmed until the modern era. Even more perplexing is the outline of the California coastline. It is rendered not as the vague, straight line common on maps of the period, but with a distinct, accurate curvature, including the pronounced inward sweep of the Gulf of California. Such specificity would not appear on commonly used European charts for another 200 years. The precision of its proportions suggests something profound. This is not the work of a draftsman guessing from sailors' tales of foggy shores. It has the feel of a technical document, a chart compiled from precise measurements or, as some researchers suggest, copied from a much older source map that employed a sophisticated cartographic grid system lost to later European mapmakers. The Hadji Ahmed Map quietly dismantles the comforting narrative of gradual exploration. It presents not a world slowly being filled in, but a world already known. It hints that the comprehensive shape of continents, their relationships to one another, was understood long before Magellan or Cook set sail. This implies a prior age of systematic, perhaps even global, surveying. But if such advanced knowledge existed, where did it come from? And what other features, now lost to us, might those ancient surveys have recorded? Our search for answers now flows from the static coastlines to the dynamic heart of a continent, following the ghost of a waterway that should not exist. But what about lands that were supposedly discovered by accident? The official story of Brazil's discovery is a textbook example. In the year 1500, a Portuguese fleet commanded by Pedro Alves Cabral, sailing for India, was blown off course by Atlantic storms. They sighted an unknown coastline and claimed it for Portugal, naming it the Island of the True Cross. It was a fortunate navigational error that gave Portugal a foothold in the New World. Yet a map exists that complicates this tidy tale, known as the King James World Chart. It is a Portuguese Portolan sea chart dated to around 1502. Its depiction of the South Atlantic is what captures the attention of historians. There, along the eastern coast of South America, is the outline of Brazil. But it is not a vague, guessed-at shape. The chart shows the coastline with a series of distinct bays, capes, and river mouths, rendered with the precise, practical detail a sailor would need for navigation. Even more telling, it labels specific points along this coast with Portuguese place names. This is not a map of a land just stumbled upon. This is a map of a land that has been seen, noted, and catalogued. The implications are profound. If this chart is genuine, it means Portuguese navigators had not only found Brazil before Cabral's famous voyage, but they had also conducted a careful survey of its shores, perhaps years earlier. Why would such a discovery be kept secret? The answer lies in the cutthroat politics of the age of discovery. Geographic knowledge was the ultimate state secret, more valuable than gold. Revealing a new land would invite rivals like Spain to contest it. By the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, the Pope had divided the unknown world between Portugal and Spain. A detailed map of Brazil could prove Portuguese priority and solidify their claim under that treaty, but only if it was revealed at the right strategic moment. The King James chart, then, is likely not a record of a first discovery, but a record of a hushed one. It represents the shadow history of exploration, where voyages were undertaken in silence, their logs locked away in royal archives, and their findings only announced to the world when it served a crown's purpose. This transforms our understanding of discovery itself. What we celebrate as a moment of finding is often just a moment of claiming, the final, public act in a long, quiet process of learning. It suggests the maps that survived in public view are merely the tip of an iceberg, beneath which lies a sunken continent of forgotten journeys. This pattern of hidden knowledge guarded by empires was not unique to Europe, as a stunning artifact from the other side of the world would soon reveal. While European courts guarded their secret charts, a world away in Korea, a different kind of map was being assembled. In the royal court of the Joseon dynasty, scholars worked with a global ambition, compiling a masterpiece known as the Kangnido. Completed in the year 1402, this massive map was a fusion of knowledge from across the known world, integrating Chinese surveys, Islamic geographical texts, and Korean observations. It presents a worldview centered on Asia, yet its scope is breathtaking. Africa is drawn with a recognizably triangular southern tip, a shape European maps would not accurately depict for another century. Europe and the Arabian Peninsula are rendered with a level of detail that seems almost out of place in East Asia at the dawn of the 15th century. But the map's greatest mystery lies in the vast, empty ocean to the east of China. There, floating in the void, are two large islands. The text beside them offers a cryptic label, calling them the land of the dwarf people. For decades, scholars debated what these shapes could represent. Were they mythical places from legend, or could they be something far more concrete? The positioning and scale have led some prominent researchers to a startling proposal. These islands may be early, distorted representations of the Americas, charted from the west. If this interpretation is correct, the Kangnido is not just a map of the Old World. It is a map that hints at the New World, potentially decades before Columbus sailed. This is not evidence of a Korean voyage across the Pacific, but rather of information flowing along the ancient Silk Road network. The map's creators wrote that they synthesized sources from over 100 different maps. Imagine a piece of knowledge, perhaps a sketch or a description from an unknown source, traveling from the edge of one continent to the center of another, being copied and reinterpreted until it settled onto Korean silk as a land of dwarfs. The Kangnido shatters the illusion of isolated civilizations. It is physical proof of a sophisticated, interconnected web of global knowledge that thrived outside of Europe, a web where geographic secrets could travel thousands of miles from their origin. It forces us to ask what else was known and shared across these ancient information highways. This flow of cartographic insight did not travel in just one direction, as a mysterious Turkish document would soon demonstrate. The Kangnido's silent testimony to a connected world finds a noisy, contentious echo centuries later in a small piece of parchment. In 1957, a map surfaced that seemed to be the ultimate prize for historians, a medieval European chart showing a land called Vinland, west of Greenland. Dated to around 1440, it depicted a triangular island with an inscription describing how Leif Erikson discovered this new land. If authentic, it would be the first known cartographic depiction of any part of the Americas, created decades before Columbus's voyage and directly corroborating the Norse sagas. The excitement was immediate and immense. Here, it seemed, was the missing graphic proof of pre-Columbian contact, drawn not from legend but from practical knowledge. The map style and vellum appeared convincingly old, and its depiction of Greenland was notably accurate for its supposed time. It promised to rewrite the opening chapter of the Age of Discovery in a single, stunning image. Then the scientists began their work. The debate that followed became one of the most bitter in historical scholarship. Advanced chemical analysis of the map's ink revealed the presence of anatase, a specific form of titanium dioxide. To many experts, this was a smoking gun. They argued that such a compound could not have existed in medieval ink and was a hallmark of 20th century production, branding the map an elaborate, ingenious forgery. The proponents of its authenticity countered fiercely, suggesting the anatase could be a rare, natural contaminant from the medieval ink-making process, or that the testing itself was flawed. The battle lines were drawn not just over chemistry but over desire. The Vinland map forces us to confront a powerful human impulse, the longing for a tangible object to confirm a story we already believe. The Norse sagas of Leif Erikson's voyages to Vinland around the year 1000 are themselves historical documents, verified by the archaeological discovery of a Norse settlement at Elance Oaks Meadows in Newfoundland in the 1960s. We know the Vikings reached North America. The map then, whether real or fake, taps into a deeper question. How do we separate the thrill of validation from the hard work of evidence? If it is a forgery, it is a masterpiece of historical fiction, created with such deep understanding of medieval cartography and the Norse narrative that it fooled many of the world's top scholars. Its very existence, real or not, underscores the potency of the idea it represents, that the Atlantic was crossed long before 1492. This artifact, forever suspended between relic and hoax, teaches a crucial lesson. In the search for lost history, our greatest obstacle is sometimes not a lack of evidence, but our own passionate hope for a particular truth. Sometimes, however, the evidence is not ink on parchment, but words carved in stone, a message far harder to fake. Centuries before any of these charts were drawn, a single name cast a shadow over all of geography. Claudius Ptolemy, a scholar working in Alexandria in the 2nd century, compiled a work of such authority that it would guide and constrain explorers for over 1,000 years. His text, the Geographia, was a mathematical treatise on how to map the spherical Earth onto a flat surface, and it came with coordinates for thousands of places. When his work was rediscovered and translated into Latin in the early 15th century, it was a revelation to Renaissance Europe. Printers rushed to produce editions of the Ptolemaic World Map, which presented a vision of the known world, from the Canary Islands in the west to a land of silk and spices in the east. To our modern eyes, these maps look profoundly wrong. They depict a landlocked Indian Ocean, enclosed by a vast southern continent that connects Africa to Asia. They show an elongated, exaggerated Asia that stretches much farther east than it actually does. Yet these were not simple mistakes. They were logical conclusions drawn from the best data of the ancient world, data that had been preserved while so much else was lost. The power of Ptolemy's era is where the story becomes truly compelling. His calculation of the Earth's circumference was significantly smaller than the true figure. Combined with his elongated Asia, this made the distance sailing west from Europe to the Indies seem far shorter than it actually was. It was this very miscalculation, printed in beautiful, authoritative maps, that convinced Christopher Columbus his voyage was feasible. He carried a copy of a Ptolemaic map with him, a testament to how ancient knowledge could simultaneously illuminate and mislead. But there is a deeper layer to this puzzle. Where did Ptolemy get his data? He was a compiler, synthesizing reports from Roman merchants, Greek sailors, and Persian caravans. Some scholars quietly suggest that within his precise coordinates might lie echoes of even older surveys, fragments of knowledge from Phoenician or perhaps even more ancient seafaring cultures whose own records have vanished. The Ptolemy map, in its Renaissance editions, is a perfect symbol of our theme. It represents both the glorious recovery of ancient wisdom and the peril of treating that wisdom as infallible scripture. It was a foundation that supported new discovery and a filter that distorted reality for generations. It reminds us that every map is a snapshot of understanding, blending hard-won truth with inherited assumption. This dance between myth and measurement takes a more literal turn with our next artifact, a chart that deliberately plots the lands of legend as if they were real destinations. Ptolemy's world map was a grand framework, but it was the details within it that often held the deepest puzzles. Among the thousands of coordinates in his Geographia, one location stands out for its sheer, bewildering scale: the island of Taprobana. Placed in the Indian Ocean, this was almost certainly the island we know as Sri Lanka. Yet on Ptolemaic maps, it is not a modest island off the coast of India. It is a colossal landmass, nearly as large as the Indian subcontinent itself, dominating the southern sea. The distortion is so extreme it cannot be dismissed as a simple error of measurement. It feels like a different kind of clue. Ancient cartographers did not have satellites, they had stories. They relied on the often exaggerated or confused reports of merchants and sailors who had braved long voyages. A traveler might speak of a rich, powerful kingdom on a large island, and a scholar in Alexandria, trying to fit that verbal account onto a grid of latitude and longitude, might inflate its physical size to match its perceived importance. The map, in this case, preserves not the geography but the impact. The kernel of truth is there, a major island in the correct general region, but it is wrapped in a layer of interpretive legend. This process of storytelling transforming into cartography opens a fascinating door. What if the reports that reached Ptolemy were not about Sri Lanka at all, but about somewhere else entirely? Some researchers have proposed an alternative theory that Taprobana represents a misunderstood account of a much larger land far to the southeast. The descriptions in some classical texts speak of a place where the night was very short and where strange, leaping animals were found. Could these be garbled tales of Australia's marsupials relayed through a long chain of traders? Even more speculatively, could the immense size of Taprobana on the map be a cultural memory, a faded echo of a larger continental shelf in the Indian Ocean that was above water during lower sea levels in the distant past? While these ideas remain on the fringes of scholarship, they illustrate the core challenge of decoding ancient maps. We are not just looking at lines on parchment. We are listening to whispers passed across centuries, whispers that are often amplified, distorted, or merged with other tales along the way. The lesson of Taprobana is universal for this entire investigation. Every ancient map is a palimpsest, a document where hard geographic data is written over by myth, and where myth may, in turn, conceal a lost reality. The cartographer's task was one of constant interpretation, trying to force the square pegs of traveler tales into the round holes of a geometric system. Sometimes they succeeded brilliantly, preserving knowledge we cannot explain. Other times they created magnificent errors like a Sri Lanka the size of a continent. To understand any of these charts, we must learn to separate the signal from the noise, to recognize when a map is showing us a place, and when it is showing us the awe that place inspired in those who first saw it. This interpretive dance becomes even more dramatic as we move from a single, swollen island to the grandest cartographic myth of all, a lost southern continent that haunted the maps of explorers for centuries. The same impulse that inflated Taprobana created the most persistent phantom in cartographic history, a lost southern continent that refused to disappear. For centuries, mapmakers from Ptolemy onward drew a vast landmass at the bottom of the world, labeling it Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. It was a logical necessity, they argued, a counterbalance to the northern continents needed to keep the Earth from tipping over. This elegant theory, born in ancient Greece, hardened into cartographic fact on hundreds of maps. Explorers like Magellan and Tasman were partly sent to find its riches, their voyages slowly chipping away at the mythical coastline until only the real Australia and Antarctica remained. This grand, imagined continent is a perfect example of how a beautiful idea can blind us to reality, how the map can precede the territory and then stubbornly insist the territory conform. It was geography as dogma, a lesson in the danger of filling empty spaces on a chart not with humility but with certainty. Yet, even as this southern myth was being dismantled, a northern one was being etched with stunning precision by the greatest mapmaker of the age. Gerardus Mercator is a name synonymous with accuracy, the man who solved the riddle of projecting a round world onto a flat map for sailors. His world map of 1569 is a landmark of scientific cartography, which makes the feature at its very top all the more bizarre. Surrounding the North Pole, Mercator drew a large, circular black rock. At its center rises a massive magnetic mountain. Flowing from its peak are four powerful rivers dividing the land into four equal quarters. This is the island of the Arctic Pole, rendered not as a vague blob, but as a precise, symmetrical diagram. In an explanatory note, Mercator was unusually candid about his source. He cited a now-lost book called The Travels of Jacob C. Noyen, which itself quoted from an even older account, a 14th-century narrative of a journey to the far north. Mercator, the ultimate technician, was copying a ghost story. This polar continent has no physical existence. So what was he documenting? Scholars believe he was mapping a myth, specifically the legendary Hyperborean world from Greek tradition, a perfect, temperate land beyond the north wind. The four rivers echo the four rivers of Eden from biblical tradition. suggesting a fusion of classical and spiritual lore into a single geographic symbol. Mercator's inclusion is profoundly revealing. It shows that even the most rigorous scientific mind of the Renaissance still operated within a framework where ancient wisdom and empirical observation shared the same page. He did not see a contradiction. To him, this was likely a legitimate geographical report from an older, respected source, and thus it deserved a place on his masterwork alongside the accurately charted coasts of Europe. The map becomes a snapshot of a worldview in transition, where the last vestiges of symbolic, mythical geography were being plotted with the same careful draftsmanship as a real coastline. It was not mere fantasy, it was the cartographic recording of a deep cultural memory, a concept of cosmic order given a precise location. From this detailed vision of a polar paradise, our journey descends into a much darker, more complex medieval imagination, where the world was not just a physical place but a moral and spiritual diagram. Mercator's scientific precision gave way to a different kind of truth in the great hall of a medieval cathedral. In Hereford Cathedral, a massive sheet of vellum, over 5 feet tall, hangs as a testament to an era when a map was not a guide to the physical world, but a guide to the soul. Created around the year 1300, the Hereford Mappa Mundi is a breathtaking work of theological cartography. Its central organizing principle is faith, not geography. Jerusalem sits at the very heart of the circle, with east at the top where paradise was believed to lie. The 3 known continents, Europe, Africa, and Asia, are arranged around this holy center in a recognizable, though stylized, TO shape, a format inherited directly from the Romans. This is the map's first secret. Beneath its vibrant illustrations of angels, strange beasts, and biblical scenes, the skeletal structure is pure classical geography, a preserved memory of the world as understood by scholars like Ptolemy centuries earlier. The map is a living bridge. It shows how the hard-won geographic framework of antiquity did not vanish during the so-called Dark Ages, but was carefully maintained within the walls of monasteries and cathedrals, repurposed to serve a new master, Christian doctrine. Here, the river Nile does not just flow, it is the home of the mythical Blemii, a tribe of people with faces on their chests. The edges of Asia are not just distant shores, they are the locations of the gates of Alexander, built to contain the savage tribes of Gog and Magog. Every landmark carries a dual meaning, a physical location and a spiritual lesson. This is not a map for sailing, it is a map for salvation, a visual sermon meant to illustrate humanity's place in a cosmos designed by God, with history, myth, and morality all plotted on the same plane. The Mappa Mundi teaches us that for medieval thinkers, the world was not an empty space to be conquered, but a storybook to be read, every mountain and river heavy with symbolic meaning. It represents the ultimate fusion of knowledge and belief, where the shape of the earth was remembered, but its purpose was reinterpreted. This profound intertwining of the terrestrial and the divine sets the stage for our next revelation, where the spiritual and the scientific would collide in the most unexpected of places, not in a European church, but within the pages of a book from a culture that mastered the stars. While the Hereford Mappa Mundi charted a spiritual cosmos, a very different kind of map was being crafted in the sun-drenched halls of a Sicilian palace, one built on observation and reason. In the royal court of King Roger II, a brilliant collaboration was unfolding between a Norman Christian king and a Muslim scholar from Al-Andalus. The geographer Al-Idrisi spent 15 years directing a project of breathtaking scope, interviewing travelers, cross-referencing ancient texts, and synthesizing reports from across the known world. The result, completed in the year 1154, was the Tabula Rogeriana, a massive silver planisphere, and a 700-page companion text called the Book of Pleasant Journeys into Faraway Lands. This was not a map of faith, but a map of facts, a systematic attempt to document the Earth as it was understood through trade, diplomacy, and exploration. Its orientation placed south at the top, following the convention of Arab cartography, offering a literal upside-down view that reminds us perspective is everything. The detail was revolutionary. It correctly showed the source of the Nile in the Great Lakes of Central Africa, a fact European maps would not acknowledge for centuries. It depicted the Indian subcontinent with startling accuracy and charted the islands of Southeast Asia based on the logs of Arab and Persian merchants who sailed the monsoon winds. Most importantly, Al-Idrisi understood the Earth as a sphere, and his work calculated distances and latitudes with a scientific rigor that had been lost in the West. The map itself became a legendary object, said to be engraved on a great disk of solid silver, a physical manifestation of the king's desire to possess the world's knowledge. While it shows no hint of the Americas, its true power lies in its role as a bridge. The Tabula Rogeriana preserved the geographic legacy of Ptolemy and the Greeks, integrated it with the advanced astronomy and navigation of the Islamic world, and enriched it with the latest first-hand accounts from Silk Road caravans and Indian Ocean dhows. When this knowledge eventually filtered back into Renaissance Europe, it provided the raw data that fueled the Age of Discovery. This map is a monument to a forgotten golden age of intercultural scholarship, where a king's patronage created a repository of global understanding that would outlast his kingdom. It proves that the most accurate world map for 300 years was not born in a European capital, but in a Mediterranean crossroads where minds from different traditions worked in unison. This flow of knowledge, from ancient texts to Arab scholars to European adventurers, suggests a continuous thread of discovery often frayed by history but never truly broken. Sometimes, however, the maps suggest discoveries of a different nature, not of new lands but of landscapes that have vanished from the world we know. The Sahara Desert today is a sea of sand, a vast and seemingly eternal emptiness. Yet, scattered across ancient maps from Roman to Arab cartographers, a ghost lingers in this barren space. They show a great river, sometimes branching into tributaries, flowing from mountainous regions in the south across the desert to reach the Atlantic coast. For centuries, these features were dismissed as pure fantasy, the cartographer's classic error of filling a blank with invention. Modern science, however, has revealed a breathtaking truth. Satellite radar penetrating the dry sand has mapped the contours of an ancient riverbed, a colossal waterway that once cut through the heart of North Africa. Geologists call it the Tamanrasset River, a paleo river system that existed between 5 and 11,000 years ago during the African humid period. Back then, the Sahara was not a desert. It was a green savanna dotted with lakes populated by giraffes and hippos, and home to human communities who fished its waters and hunted along its banks. The maps were not drawing fiction. They were preserving an environmental memory, a geographic echo of a world that had vanished millennia before the mapmakers were born. This raises a profound question. How could knowledge of a river that dried up thousands of years earlier persist into the medieval period? The answer likely lies in oral tradition and fragmented observation. Nomadic peoples crossing the desert might have passed down stories of a great river from ancestor to ancestor, a central legend of a lost fertile age. Furthermore, even in its dry state, the ancient river valley would have been a natural pathway, its depressions sometimes holding seasonal water or supporting a distinct line of vegetation, a faint scar on the landscape that whispered of its past purpose. A cartographer compiling reports from travelers who followed this greener route might have interpreted those hints as evidence of a current, active river. This map feature, repeated across cultures and centuries, becomes something more than a chart. It is a palimpsest of climate, a layer of deep time etched onto parchment. It proves that maps can be archives of planetary change, holding memories of shifts in rain patterns and sea levels that reshape continents. This realization naturally turns our gaze from the lost rivers of the desert to the lost coastlines of the world, to maps that seem to remember when the shore was in a different place. The ghost of a river in the Sahara hints at maps preserving deep time, but another set of charts captures a different kind of lost precision, one born from daily necessity. Sometime in the 13th century, a new and revolutionary kind of map appeared in the maritime workshops of Italy and Majorca, as if fully formed from the sea mist. These were the Portolan charts, and to a modern eye they look strikingly, almost shockingly modern. Forget the symbolic TO shapes or the theological diagrams. These were working tools for sailors, drawn on sheepskin with a practical, urgent clarity. The coastlines of the Mediterranean and the Black Sea are rendered with a fluid, accurate sweep, as if seen from a ship sailing just offshore. Harbors, coves, headlands, and river mouths are all meticulously noted in a dense script, but the most distinctive features are the web of lines radiating from central points, the room lines, and the ornate compass roses that look like decorated stars. This network was a primitive but brilliant navigation computer. A sailor could lay a ruler along a line from his known port to a compass rose, note the bearing, and then use his magnetic compass to sail that exact course across open water. The accuracy was such that many Portolan charts, when overlaid on modern satellite images, show coastlines that match with uncanny fidelity, and this is where the historical mystery deepens. There are no clumsy, evolving prototypes of these charts. They appear in the historical record with this sophisticated, complete design, at a time when other world maps were still dominated by myth and religious symbolism. It is as if someone simply opened a vault and distributed a perfected technology. So where did they come from? The most compelling theory is that they are not a medieval invention at all, but the end product of a secret lineage. For centuries, perhaps millennia, pilots and captains in the Mediterranean would have kept their own private notebooks, sketching coastlines, noting landmarks, and recording safe passages. This was knowledge more valuable than cargo, passed from master to apprentice in a closed, professional guild. The Portolan chart may be the moment this oral and scribbled tradition finally coalesced into a standardized, portable form. Some researchers go further, suggesting the core geographic data within these charts is far older, copied and recopied from master charts that dated back to the height of Roman or even Phoenician seamanship. The Phoenicians, after all, were the legendary sailors of antiquity, navigating by the stars and guarding their trade routes with fierce secrecy. Could a fragment of their hard-won coastal surveys have survived, hidden in some library in Alexandria or Constantinople, only to resurface centuries later in the hands of Geno's cartographers? The sudden perfection of the Portolan charts suggests a forgotten continuity, an unbroken chain of practical knowledge that flowed beneath the surface of recorded history, from one generation of sailors to the next, entirely separate from the scholarly map-making of kings and clerics. They are a testament not to a single genius, but to the accumulated wisdom of countless anonymous voyages, a collective memory of the sea etched onto vellum. This mastery of the earthly coastline, however, was just one half of the ancient navigator's art. To cross the open ocean, they needed a different map, one not drawn on skin or paper, but written in the night sky itself. Centuries before sailors charted coastlines, a different kind of mapmaker was at work. In the royal libraries of ancient Babylon, a scholar pressed a stylus into wet clay, creating not a guide for travel, but a diagram of the cosmos itself. This object, known as the Babylonian World Map, and dating to around 600 years before the Common Era, is the oldest known attempt to depict the entire world. At first glance, it looks nothing like a map to our modern eyes. Babylon is a large rectangle at the very center. The city is surrounded by a ring representing the Euphrates River, then a circular band labeled as the Salt Sea, the ocean that encircled all known lands. Beyond this cosmic ocean, at the edges of the circular tablet, are a series of small triangles. The cuneiform text beside them is haunting. It reads simply, "Regions where the sun is not seen, and beyond the flight of birds." This is not a physical geography. It is a spiritual and ideological one, a powerful statement of Babylonian centrality in the universal order. The world was not measured in miles but in meaning. Yet for all its symbolism, the map anchors itself in reality. Around the central city, the artist carefully placed other rectangles, labeling real neighboring lands like Assyria and Urartu. This reveals the map's dual purpose. It served as a cosmological model, placing Babylon at the heart of creation, while simultaneously codifying the practical political and geographic knowledge of the empire's scribes. It was a filing cabinet and a declaration of divine order fused into one clay tablet. This foundational artifact teaches us a critical lesson about the origins of cartography. The very first world map was not made to get you from one city to another. It was made to tell you why your city mattered in the grand scheme of the universe. It organized chaos into a comprehensible circle with the known inside and the unimaginable outside. This conceptual framework, the map as a tool for ideological control and cosmic understanding, would echo for millennia. But as empires expanded and trade routes stretched, the need for a different kind of map emerged, one that could encompass a world far wider than the banks of the Euphrates. The distant triangles labeled beyond the flight of birds would not stay mythical forever. Someone eventually would go looking for them. The clay tablet's symbolic world was a closed circle, but by the late 15th century, that circle was straining to burst. In a workshop in Florence, a German cartographer named Henricus Martellus was quietly assembling the most advanced picture of the world anyone had ever seen. His large world map, created around 1491, is a masterpiece of transition. It sits at the exact pivot point between the ancient and the modern, a document so influential it may have literally changed history, for it is very likely that Christopher Columbus studied a copy before his fateful voyage. Martellus worked at the perfect crossroads of information. He had the full weight of the Ptolemaic tradition, the classical framework that still shaped scholarly thought. But flowing into his workshop were also the latest, secret reports from Portuguese caravels pushing down the African coast. His map absorbs this collision of data. Africa is no longer a landmass that curls east to enclose the Indian Ocean, as Ptolemy had dictated. On Martellus's parchment, Africa has a definite southern tip. It is shown as circumnavigable, a direct reflection of the Portuguese voyages that were, at that very moment, proving it. Asia, too, stretches far to the east in an elongated form, reinforcing the belief that sailing west would be a shorter route to its riches. But the map's true mystery lies in a shadowy southern land. Below the Spice Islands of Southeast Asia, some versions of the Martellus map show a large, roughly drawn continent. It is unnamed and crudely shaped, hanging in the empty ocean like a ghost. What was it? Scholars have debated for decades. To some, its position suggests it could be a fragmented understanding of South America, perhaps based on whispers of Portuguese or even earlier sightings that had leaked north from secret archives. To others, its placement further south hints at something even more astonishing, a vague awareness of the northern coastline of Australia, filtered through Malay or Javanese traders who may have known of its existence. We may never know Martellus's specific source for this landmass. That is precisely what makes his map so vital. It is a visual record of the moment when hard, new facts began to overwrite ancient theory, yet the old outline still showed through. The map is a literal palimpsest, a layered document where the faded ink of Ptolemy's enclosed sea is still visible beneath the bold new lines of an open ocean leading to an unknown west. Martellus was not making things up. He was compiling every scrap of data he could find, and that data pool contained whispers of lands that official history had not yet claimed. His work provided the final, persuasive image that convinced an ambitious Genoa sailor the world was ready to be crossed. This pre-Columbian snapshot proves that the voyage of 1492 was not a leap into pure darkness, but a step into a twilight of half-known truths and cartographic rumors. The Admiral's own notes are the most important clue we possess. Piri Reis did not claim to have sailed to Antarctica himself, nor did he present his chart as an original work of genius. He was a compiler, a curator of dying knowledge. In the margins of his map, he wrote that he had consulted approximately 20 source charts and world maps, some of which were incredibly old, dating to the era of Alexander the Great in the 4th century before the Common Era, and others he called Arabic maps of India. This simple statement opens a door to a lost library of the ancient world. Imagine those source maps, perhaps drawn on fragile papyrus or vellum, stored in the great libraries of Alexandria or Constantinople, copied and recopied by scribes across generations as the empires that created them rose and fell. They were not static documents, but living data passed from the hands of Ptolemaic surveyors to Roman navigators, from Byzantine scholars to Arab geographers, and finally to an Ottoman admiral who recognized their fading value. The true mystery is not the Piri Reis map itself, but the ghostly collection of charts that stand behind it. What wonders did they contain? If the Antarctic coastline on the final compilation is genuine, then at least one of those source maps held a memory of a green continent, a snapshot of the Earth from a warmer age. This suggests a chain of custody for geographical knowledge so long it spans millennia. Think of it as a game of whispers played across centuries, where a precise coastline is copied by a Greek scholar in Alexandria, then by an Arab cartographer in Baghdad, then by a Venetian trader, each copy introducing tiny errors but preserving the core, impossible shape. This concept of a map chain is the master key to all 30 of these anomalies. It explains how a fact about the world, discovered by an unknown civilization during the last warm period, could survive its discoverers by thousands of years. The data outlived the culture that recorded it, becoming a piece of detached, anonymous information floating through history, looking for a final resting place on a 16th century parchment. So what might these ultimate source maps have looked like? They would not have been ornate works of art for a king's court. They would have been practical, perhaps even stark, documents of exploration. They likely employed a grid system or coordinate method for accuracy, a technique lost to later European mapmakers who focused on decorative portolan charts. Their coastlines would have been rendered with a startling, almost modern fluidity, free of the monstrous creatures and theological symbols that filled the blank spaces on medieval maps. They were probably the products of a systematic, scientific culture that saw the world as something to be measured, not just mythologized. The loss of this library is one of history's great silences. When the Library of Alexandria burned, we mourn the loss of plays and poems and philosophies, but perhaps we also lost the atlases of a world we are only just rediscovering. The Piri Reis map is therefore not an endpoint, but a single, fragile link in a chain that stretches back into deep time. A chain that connects our age of satellites to an age of forgotten explorers who mapped the rivers of a continent now locked in ice. The chain of lost knowledge leads us to a civilization remembered more for its silence than its maps. The Minoans of Crete built palaces without walls, their security resting on the mastery of the sea. Their frescoes show sleek ships with dozens of oars, and archaeological finds across the Mediterranean prove they traded for copper from Cyprus, ivory from Egypt, and tin from beyond the known world. They were a maritime power for centuries, yet not a single Minoan chart has ever been found. This absence is itself a clue. For a culture that lived by the sea, navigational knowledge would have been its most guarded treasure, more valuable than gold. We can imagine, then, the possibility of their maps not as decorative artifacts for a king's hall, but as practical tools etched on wax tablets or painted on treated leather, showing safe harbors, prevailing currents, and the dangerous shoals between Crete and the Nile Delta. These would have been state secrets known only to a guild of master pilots. Later, the Phoenicians inherited and expanded this seafaring legacy, becoming the legendary traders of antiquity, said to sail beyond the Pillars of Hercules into the Atlantic fog. If any culture possessed a detailed chart of the Atlantic coastline in the first millennium before the Common Era, it would have been them. Their voyages were cloaked in intentional mystery, stories of sea monsters spread to deter competitors. A Phoenician portolan chart would have been worth a fleet, so what happened to all of this accumulated knowledge? The answer lies in the nature of empires and catastrophe. The great palace centers of the Minoans were shattered by volcanic eruption and tsunami. The Phoenician cities of Tyre and Carthage were systematically sacked and burned by their enemies. In such chaos, libraries burn first. A clay tablet might survive a conquest, but a delicate, painted sea chart, it would turn to ash or rot in a flooded cellar. Yet the idea that every copy was destroyed is difficult to accept. It is more likely that some survived as loot, carried off by victorious generals as curiosities, eventually finding their way into the archives of Alexandria or the private collections of Roman scholars. There, their labels faded, their origins forgotten. They simply became old maps, their data copied and absorbed into new works. This speculative journey is not about proving these maps existed, but about changing our perspective. It asks us to see the blank spaces in our historical record not as emptiness, but as a silence following a great conversation. The surviving maps we have been studying, from Piri Reis to the Portolans, may not be originals. They might be the final, faint echoes of that conversation, fragments of a vast, lost corpus of maritime knowledge that once connected the Bronze Age world. From this realm of scholarly speculation, we return to a map of undeniable physical beauty, one that captures the moment a new continent finally stepped into the full light of history. The Cantino Planisphere is a map born from espionage. In the year 1502, Alberto Cantino, an agent for the Duke of Ferrara in Italy, performed a daring act of intellectual theft in Lisbon. He secretly commissioned a copy of the Portuguese crown's most precious asset, their master world chart, and smuggled it out of the country. The resulting map is a breathtaking snapshot of a world in violent transition, a cartographic trophy that captures the raw, competitive edge of the age of discovery. Its colors are still vibrant today, a vivid depiction of coastlines that were rewriting history. We see Vasco da Gama's route to India carefully traced around Africa, whose southern tip is now definitively proven to be a gateway, not a barrier. Most strikingly, there on the left side of the parchment is a large, bulbous landmass labeled Terra do Brasil. This is one of the very first maps to show the New World not as scattered islands, but as a continuous continental coastline. A thin vertical line cuts through the Atlantic Ocean, a silent but powerful graphic. This is the line of demarcation from the Treaty of Tordesillas, the Pope's decree that divided the unknown world between Spain and Portugal. The Cantino map is not just a chart, it is a legal document and a statement of imperial ambition drawn in ink and gold leaf. The speed of its creation is staggering. Pedro Álvares Cabral's fleet had only returned to Lisbon 2 years earlier, claiming the Brazilian coast for Portugal. Yet here it is, rendered with a confident, almost casual detail that suggests the mapmakers were not struggling to interpret vague logs, but were instead placing precise new data into an existing framework. This velocity forces a difficult question. Was Portuguese cartography so brilliantly advanced that they could survey, digest, and publish a new continent's outline within 24 months? Or does this swift, authoritative depiction hint at something else? Perhaps the broad shape of the South American coast was not entirely unknown. Could Portuguese sailors, or those they inherited knowledge from, have had earlier, unrecorded glimpses of this shoreline? The map's precision might be a fusion of stunning new exploration with much older, fragmentary charts that provided the skeleton, which the voyages of Cabral and others then fleshed out with concrete detail. The Cantino Planisphere thus marks a pivotal moment, the instant when rumor solidified into fact on parchment. It represents the end of one mystery and the beginning of another, proving that once a land was officially claimed, its place on the map became permanent, instantly consigning all previous charts without it to the dusty shelves of history. This race to fix geography in ink pushes us to consider the final, most profound layer of this puzzle. What if the source of all this impossible knowledge was not a lost civilization of humans, but the fading memory of a civilization that was not human at all? The map that gave a name to a continent was not drawn by a conqueror, but by a scholar in a small town in what is now France. In the workshop of Martin Waldseemüller, the world was being reassembled from fragments of new and old reports, and the result, published in 1507, was nothing short of a cartographic revolution. His large world map, often called the birth certificate of America, did something radical. It showed the lands across the Atlantic not as extensions of Asia, but as two entirely separate continents, a distinct new world. He connected these lands to the south, depicting a continuous coastline running from what we know as Canada all the way down to the southern tip of South America. This was a breathtaking leap of insight, a conceptual breakthrough that most explorers of his day had not yet made. Even more astonishing is the vast, empty ocean he placed between this new world and Asia. He labeled it simply Mare Oceanus, the Ocean Sea. This was the Pacific, a body of water no European had yet reported seeing. Vasco Núñez de Balboa would not glimpse it from a peak in Panama for another 6 years, and Magellan would not cross it for another dozen. So how did Waldseemüller know it was there? The map's own text offers a clue and a tantalizing mystery. Waldseemüller wrote that he was following the voyages of Amerigo Vespucci, the Florentine merchant whose published letters described a new continental landmass. But Vespucci's accounts, while vivid, did not provide the precise coastal contours Waldseemüller drew. The shape of South America on this map is eerily prescient, its eastern bulge and tapered southern coast far more accurate than the vague shapes on other charts of the period. This has led scholars to a compelling hypothesis. Waldseemüller and his collaborator Matthias Ringman likely had access to a now-vanished Portuguese chart, a secret master map compiled from the logs of dozens of voyages that the Portuguese crown kept locked away. Such a chart would have synthesized the findings of Cabral, Vespucci, and perhaps other captains whose names are lost to us, creating a composite picture that a brilliant cartographer in Lorraine could then interpret and publish. The act of naming was almost an afterthought. In a small pamphlet accompanying the map, Ringman suggested the new lands be called America, after Amerigo Vespucci, in the same feminine Latin form as Europe and Asia. The name stuck, immortalized by the printing press. The Waldseemüller map, therefore, is a monument to the power of information synthesis. It represents the moment when disparate dots of discovery were connected into a coherent and correct global picture. It proves that by 1507, the learned elite of Europe already possessed a shockingly accurate mental model of the planet's geography, one that would take common knowledge another century to catch up to. This explosive expansion of the world was not a slow filling in of blanks, but a sudden, brilliant illumination, as if a curtain had been pulled back to reveal a stage already set. Johannes Schörner did not just draw the world, he held it in his hands. In his workshop in Nuremberg, this mathematician and priest crafted celestial and terrestrial globes, three-dimensional models that scholars could rotate and study. His globes from 1515 and 1520 are not merely decorative objects, they are crystallized moments of confusion and revelation. On their surfaces, we see the new world struggling to be born from a soup of half-truths and ancient dogma. One of his globes labels the emerging lands across the Atlantic with the phrase America novita delineata, America newly delineated, yet the delineation was anything but clear. His depiction of South America is particularly telling. It appears with a strange, finger-like peninsula jutting far out into the Western Ocean. To some later observers, this odd protrusion looked tantalizingly like the Antarctic Peninsula, suggesting a wild theory that the two continents might be connected. In reality, it was almost certainly a cartographic mirage, a misinterpretation of the complex geography of the Chilean coastline or the Tierra del Fuego archipelago, blended with the persistent expectation that a great southern land must lie nearby. This is the true value of Schirner's work. His globes are not records of absolute truth, but records of the intellectual process itself. They show real data from Portuguese and Spanish voyages colliding with the theoretical necessity of Terra Australis, the great balancing continent that classical geography demanded exist. The southern landmass on his globes is a phantom, shaped partly by hope and partly by the lingering authority of ancient texts. These physical spheres made the world's mysteries tangible. A scholar could run a finger along that strange peninsula and wonder, was this the edge of Brazil or a gateway to an undiscovered empire? They are artifacts of an age when every new ship's log could radically alter the shape of the known universe, and the old maps refused to quietly fade away. This dance between the flat page and the round globe, between observation and theory, defines the entire era, and it is on a flat page, one of the most beautiful ever created, where this dance reached its most exquisite and puzzling form. While scholars in Europe grappled with globes, a far older document lay preserved in the dry sands of Egypt, a map drawn not for kings or cosmology, but for the gritty work of a quarry foreman. The Turin Papyrus Map, dating to around 1150 years before the Common Era, is a stunningly practical piece of ancient engineering. It charts the Wadi Hammamat, a desert valley rich in prized stone like Bekan, the dark grey waki used for statues and sarcophagi. This is not a symbolic representation. Drawn on a scroll of papyrus, it depicts the wadi's winding course with a remarkable eye for topography. You can see the jagged lines of the surrounding mountains, the location of the quarry itself marked clearly, and even the roads leading to it. Distances between key points are noted in Egyptian units of measure, and the map includes annotations about the quality of the stone found in specific beds. It is, in every sense, a working blueprint for resource extraction, a tool to guide a royal expedition into the eastern desert and bring back valuable materials for the pharaoh's monuments. Its age alone is breathtaking, making it one of the oldest surviving topographic maps in the entire world. But its true significance lies in what it reveals about Egyptian technical skill. This was a culture that thought cartographically. They understood scale. They could translate a three-dimensional landscape into a two-dimensional plan, and they did so for the most mundane of reasons, to get a job done efficiently. This practical mastery forces a profound shift in our perspective. We often associate ancient maps with myth or ideology, like the Babylonian World Tablet or the Hereford Mappa Mundi. The Turin Papyrus shows us the other side of the coin. It proves that alongside their spiritual geography, the Egyptians possessed a robust scientific tradition of surveying for immediate earthly needs. If the royal scribes could produce this level of accurate, detailed mapping for a desert wadi, what else were they capable of charting? The logical extension is compelling. The Egyptians were a naval power. They traded extensively across the eastern Mediterranean and down the Red Sea. sending expeditions to the fabled land of Punt for incense, gold, and exotic woods. Could their ship captains and royal architects have created similarly precise charts of the Nile Delta's shifting branches, or of the safe harbors along the Sinai coast? What about navigational maps of the Red Sea, noting reefs, currents, and freshwater sources? The skills demonstrated on the papyrus are exactly the foundational skills required for coastal and maritime cartography. The map itself does not show unknown continents, and that is precisely its power. It provides the credible, physical evidence of a high level of cartographic literacy. It builds a foundation of possibility. If this detailed workaday map survived by chance in a dry tomb, how many other, perhaps more ambitious, charts have been lost to time, humidity, or deliberate destruction? The Turin Papyrus is a quiet, unassuming witness. It tells us that the technical ability to create accurate maps of distant lands absolutely existed in the ancient world. It turns the question from a speculative "could they have" into a much more reasonable "why wouldn't they have?" This tangible proof of practical skill makes the idea of lost, advanced ancient maps far less a fantasy and far more a historical probability. From this foundation of stone and papyrus, the journey of the map now ascends, transforming from a guide for the body into a guide for the soul, from the quarries of the physical world to the celestial realms of the afterlife. Sometimes the most compelling maps were never drawn at all. Among the legendary wonders of the ancient world, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon hold a unique place, a marvel described in glowing detail by historians like Diodorus Siculus, yet one that has left no physical trace for archaeologists. While we have no parchment chart labeled with its terraces and waterworks, the vivid written accounts function as a different kind of guide. These texts are, in essence, textual maps. Diodorus provided dimensions, described the ascending tiers of stone pillars and planted earth, and detailed the complex machinery that lifted water from the Euphrates River to the very top. For centuries, scholars and artists have used these precise descriptions to create reconstructions, translating words back into visual form. This process reveals a profound truth about how geography and wonder were preserved. Knowledge of distant or legendary places did not only travel on fragile scrolls or portolan charts, it could also be encoded in story, in the meticulous prose of a historian, or in the oral traditions of travelers. A sailor might not have carried a chart of a mythical garden, but he could carry a detailed description of its location and splendor, passed from one generation to the next like a cherished heirloom. This expands our very definition of a map. It becomes any systematic representation of space, visual or textual, that transmits locational knowledge across time. A poem singing of a city's 7 hills, a merchant's log listing ports in order, a royal inscription detailing the borders of a province, all of these are maps in their own right. They form a resilient, distributed network of memory, far harder to erase than any single library. When we understand this, the persistence of impossible knowledge becomes clearer. The shape of a lost coastline might survive not as a line on vellum, but as a recurring description in a dozen different chronicles, a ghost in the archive waiting for a cartographer to connect the dots. This broader view prepares us for a moment when a literal, physical map did survive, waiting millennia for the right technology to reveal its secrets. The legend emerged not from a scholar's archive, but from the front page of a newspaper. In April of 1909, the Arizona Gazette published an explosive report claiming that 2 explorers funded by the Smithsonian Institution had made a staggering discovery deep within a remote branch of the Grand Canyon. They described finding a vast man-made cavern system, its entrance cleverly concealed. Inside, they allegedly found a treasure trove of artifacts, including copper weapons, statues resembling deities from Egypt and Tibet, and hundreds of rooms filled with unknown relics. The most tantalizing detail of all was a map. The article claimed this cavern held a large chart, a map of the ancient world, showing the continents as they were known to this lost civilization. The story spread like wildfire, capturing the public imagination with the promise of a hidden library of history, a physical vault containing the ultimate proof of a forgotten, global past. There was just one overwhelming problem. No evidence has ever surfaced to support a single claim in that article. The Smithsonian has no record of such an expedition. The named explorers cannot be verified. No subsequent expedition, official or amateur, has ever located this cavern or its contents. The consensus among historians and archaeologists is clear. The story was almost certainly a sensational hoax, a piece of yellow journalism designed to sell papers in an era fascinated by Egyptian discoveries and the mysteries of the American Southwest. Yet, like the best myths, it refuses to die. Why does this debunked tale still resonate so powerfully a century later? Its endurance speaks to a profound human yearning, the desire for a single, definitive key. We do not just want fragments and whispers like the Piri Reis map. We want the source itself. We dream of walking into that hidden cavern, holding that ancient world map in our hands and seeing the whole story laid out at once. It is the cartographic equivalent of a Rosetta Stone, an artifact so complete it would silence all doubt and rewrite every textbook in a single afternoon. This persistent legend highlights the emotional core of our entire investigation. We are not merely assembling a puzzle, we are searching for the box top with the full picture on it. The fantasy of the Grand Canyon map reveals that our fascination is as much about closure as it is about discovery. We long for the case to be solved, for the mystery to end with a dramatic, physical revelation. But history, especially lost history, rarely offers such neat conclusions. The real work is done in the quiet study of fragments, in the patient comparison of ink and vellum, in the scientific analysis of a line's curve. The legend's ultimate value is not in its truth, but in the mirror it holds up to our own hopes. It shows us that the maps we have been studying, with all their frustrating ambiguities and maddening hints, are perhaps more authentic precisely because they are incomplete. They are not the final answer in a cavern. They are a trail of breadcrumbs leading us through the forest of time. And following that trail today requires us to exchange the explorer's pickaxe for a different kind of tool, one that can see through the surface of the earth itself. The legend of a hidden cavern map is a powerful fantasy, but the real breakthrough in this mystery has come from a tool that requires no digging at all. Modern researchers have moved from dusty archives to the clean, bright light of a computer screen, using Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, software to perform a kind of digital archaeology. The process is both simple and profound. They take a high-resolution scan of an ancient map, like the one by Piri Reis or Oronteus Finaeus, and overlay it onto a precise satellite projection of our modern world. The software can then stretch, rotate, and adjust the old parchment to see if its shapes correspond to real geography. This transforms what was once a subjective debate, a matter of squinting at old paper and saying it looks sort of like something, into a question of measurable data. The coastline either fits or it does not, and the degree of fit can be calculated down to the pixel. For some of these maps, the results are enough to make you lean back from the monitor. When certain known distortions, like the common errors in calculating longitude that plagued all pre-18th century cartography, are accounted for, specific coastlines snap into alignment with an uncanny click. The contour of a bay, the bend of a river mouth drawn 500 years ago, will match the satellite image with a precision that feels less like coincidence and more like a direct copy. This technological approach brings a 21st century scalpel to a centuries-old puzzle, allowing scholars to isolate the signal of genuine geographic knowledge from the noise of artistic license, copying errors, and pure myth. It provides a new, more rigorous language for the mystery, We are no longer just wondering if a map looks right. We can now measure how right it might be, and which specific parts of it carry that impossible weight of accuracy. This analytical step, however, naturally pushes toward a larger, more daring question. If we can prove through pixels and algorithms that fragments of these maps are authentically showing lands unknown to their era, then we must finally ask, where did that core geographic data originally come from? The digital overlay does not create the mystery. It simply confirms its existence with cold, hard numbers, setting the stage for the ultimate synthesis of all we have seen. The digital overlay confirms the mystery, but it does not solve it. Stepping back from the individual charts, a constellation of common threads emerges from these 30 maps. First, they share a specific type of accuracy, one focused on coastlines and major geographic features, the kind of information a sailor or surveyor would record. Second, this precision often appears suddenly in the historical record, without clear, evolving prototypes. Third, many of the mapmakers themselves, like Piri Reis, openly stated they were copying from much older, sometimes ancient, sources. These patterns are too consistent to dismiss as random noise, so what overarching theory can make sense of them? Scholars and researchers have proposed several frameworks, each with its own compelling narrative. The most dramatic is the idea of a lost global civilization, a sophisticated culture like the legendary Atlantis that mapped the world in a prehistoric golden age before being erased by a cataclysm. Its survivors, the theory suggests, scattered fragments of their knowledge, which later cultures preserved as sacred, incomprehensible relics. A more grounded, yet still expansive, theory points to known ancient seafarers operating at a level we have underestimated. The Phoenicians, celebrated as master navigators, or the Minoans before them, could have undertaken systematic voyages of exploration, creating master charts that were later copied and traded as state secrets along the Silk Road and other ancient networks. A third, quieter possibility focuses on preservation rather than discovery. The great libraries of the ancient world, like those of Alexandria, Constantinople, or Baghdad, may have housed a complete corpus of global geography compiled from countless expeditions over millennia. When those libraries were lost to fire, war, or decay, only scattered copies of copies survived, their origins forgotten, their data seeping into later works. And of course, there is the skeptical counterpoint that we are seeing a grand series of coincidences, lucky guesses, and the cumulative errors of copyists being misinterpreted as premonition. Among these ideas, one theory has gained significant traction for its balance of audacity and plausibility, the ancient source map hypothesis. This suggests there was indeed a golden age of scientific cartography, not in some mythical time, but in the historical antiquity of the Greek or Roman eras, or even earlier. Think of the Roman Empire at its height, with its vast network of roads, its need to administer provinces from Britain to Egypt, and its core of military surveyors. It is entirely conceivable they commissioned detailed world maps based on centuries of trade and military reports, maps that were far more accurate than the symbolic diagrams of the medieval period that followed. When Rome fragmented, these master charts, drawn on perishable materials, would have been lost in the West, but copies may have survived in the Eastern Roman Empire and the scholarly centers of the Islamic world, to be rediscovered centuries later. This theory elegantly bridges the gap. It does not require an unknown civilization, only a fuller appreciation of the technical capabilities and geographic reach of cultures we already know existed. It treats the anomalies not as magic but as archaeology, as surviving fragments of a once complete and sophisticated system of knowledge that was fractured by time. Evaluating these ideas requires a delicate balance, a willingness to follow the evidence with open-minded inquiry, while maintaining a rigorous skepticism that questions every assumption. It is the essential tension at the heart of this entire investigation. With these frameworks in mind, we must now directly confront the most powerful argument from the skeptics, the one objection that seeks to dismantle the mystery at its foundation. Skepticism is not the enemy of mystery, it is its necessary companion. For every ancient map that seems to hold impossible knowledge, a strong and reasonable counter-argument exists, one grounded in the practical realities of how these charts were made. The human hand, after all, is not a satellite. It is prone to error, assumption, and the powerful desire to make sense of a blank space. Take the most famous example, the so-called ice-free Antarctica on the Piri Reis and Oronteus Finaeus maps. Many mainstream scholars argue this is not a lost continent at all, but a distorted representation of the southern tip of South America, its coastline stretched, mirrored, and merged with rumors of other lands. A cartographer working from conflicting sailor reports might easily combine the rugged inlets of Patagonia with tales of a great southern land, creating a composite shape that we, centuries later with our modern maps, mistakenly identify as Antarctica. The resemblance, they say, is a classic case of apophenia, our brain's tendency to find meaningful patterns in random information, like seeing a face in the clouds. We want the lines to match, so our minds make them match. Consider also the stunning accuracy of the Mediterranean on Portolan charts. This is not evidence of lost ancient surveys, skeptics propose, but the natural result of cumulative, practical observation. For generations, sailors navigated these waters, their collective memory of every bay and headland growing more precise with each passing voyage. By the 13th century, that pooled knowledge had simply reached a point of refinement that appears sudden to us, but was actually the product of slow, steady improvement. Copying errors could also create phantom accuracy. If a mapmaker misplaces a river or exaggerates a peninsula on one chart, and that error is then copied by others for centuries, it might eventually, by sheer chance, align with a real feature on a continent no one knew about yet. It would be a cartographic accident, a lucky mistake frozen in ink. This perspective is crucial. It reminds us that the past was not populated by infallible sages, but by people doing their best with limited information, blending hard fact with educated guess, and sometimes just filling empty oceans with decorative scrollwork or hopeful geography. The extraordinary claims made by these maps demand an equally rigorous scrutiny. We must constantly ask ourselves, are we discovering a secret history, or are we witnessing the ordinary, fascinating process of human error and ingenuity? Yet, even after applying this rigorous skepticism, a residue of the mystery remains, pointing us toward something deeper than mere geography. A map is never just a collection of lines and labels. It is a self-portrait of the culture that drew it. The true power of these 30 ancient charts lies not only in the lands they might reveal, but in the undeniable truths they broadcast about the people who held the pen. Every map is a cultural mirror reflecting a society's knowledge, its hierarchies, its deepest fears, and its wildest hopes. Look at the Hereford Mappa Mundi, with Jerusalem planted firmly at the center of a world shaped by faith. Its purpose was not to guide a traveler from London to Rome, but to guide a soul toward salvation, placing humanity within a divine story. Contrast that with the Korean Kangnido, which centers the massive, dignified landmass of China, reflecting a worldview organized around the Celestial Empire and the tributary system that defined East Asian diplomacy for centuries. These are not inaccurate maps, they are maps of a different truth, one measured in spiritual and political meaning rather than nautical miles. Even the ruthlessly practical Portolan charts, with their dense webs of room lines, reflect a specific culture, the emerging merchant republics of the Mediterranean. Their truth was commercial and navigational, devoid of angels or mythical kings, concerned only with the safe, profitable movement of goods. The empty spaces on these maps are perhaps the most telling features of all. What a culture chooses to leave blank or what it chooses to fill with monsters speaks volumes. The phrase "here be dragons" was rarely actually written, but the concept was etched into the parchment through illustrations of sea serpents and strange races at the edges. These were not necessarily lies, they were honest admissions of ignorance transformed into warnings. The unknown was terrifying, and the map gave that fear a shape and a location, making the psychological frontier as real as the geographic one. This shift in perspective is liberating. It allows us to step back from the exhausting debate of real versus fake, accurate versus mistaken. We can begin to appreciate each map as a complex document, a fusion of measured observation, inherited dogma, wishful thinking, and artistic convention. A single chart can contain a coastline copied with scientific precision from an ancient source right beside a fanciful drawing of a cyclops, because to the mapmaker, both were legitimate reports about the world. One came from a sailor's log, the other from a respected classical text, and who was he to question the authority of the ancients? When we view these works as cultural mirrors, the depiction of an unknown southern continent becomes less a puzzle about Antarctica and more a profound insight into the European Renaissance mind. Terra Australis Incognita was not just a guess, it was a necessity. It was the physical manifestation of a philosophical belief in balance and symmetry, a blank canvas upon which generations projected their dreams of wealth, paradise, or biblical land. The map gave their theories a form, making them seem inevitable, almost real. This reflective view does not diminish the mystery of the anomalous coastlines, but it frames them within a richer, more human context. It suggests that the transmission of lost knowledge was not a clean, digital transfer of data. It was a messy, creative process. An ancient, accurate coastline might be copied by a medieval monk who, not understanding its origin, might subtly bend it to fit his parchment's shape or decorate its shores with beasts from his own bestiary. The hard geographic fact becomes wrapped in a layer of contemporary belief, like a seed preserved in amber. To find the seed, we must first understand the amber. Seeing these maps as cultural statements prepares us for a final, overarching question. If they are mirrors, what do they collectively say about us, the people looking into them centuries later? Our relentless search for lost continents and pre-Columbian voyages reveals our own cultural obsessions, our desire for forgotten grandeur and hidden truths. We are the latest in a long line of interpreters, gazing at these old parchments and seeing not only the world they intended to portray, but the shadow of the world we have lost. The 30th map is not a single parchment, but the collective shadow they all cast across time. These 30 documents leave behind a legacy far greater than any one coastline or curious river. They have sat in quiet archives only to erupt into public consciousness and reshape how we think about our own past. For centuries, they have served as fuel for two very different fires. On one hand, they have inspired genuine explorers, whispering of lands beyond the horizon and urging men like Columbus to test the edges of the known world. On the other, their very impossibility has made them cornerstones for elaborate conspiracy theories, tales of ancient astronauts or sunken continents that often overshadow the subtler, more profound historical questions they raise. Within academic halls, they are persistent thorns, challenging the smooth, linear narrative of discovery taught in textbooks and forcing historians to account for uncomfortable anomalies. Their silent presence in glass museum cases is a perpetual challenge, a visual question mark hanging over the story we tell ourselves about human ingenuity. The biggest mystery they present may not be technical. It is not simply who possessed the skill to chart Antarctica without ice, or which civilization first sailed around Africa. The deeper, more haunting question is about the fragility of knowledge itself. How does an entire library of understanding, a complete picture of the world, simply vanish? And by what miraculous random chance do a few scattered pages, a handful of coppered fragments, survive the wreck of ages? These maps are those surviving pages. They are not the book, but they prove the book once existed. They suggest that our recorded history is not the full record, that it is merely the surviving draft of a much longer, more complex story of human curiosity and movement. Each chart is a tantalizing piece of evidence in the greatest cold case of all time, the case of our own forgotten journeys. They transform history from a closed book, its chapters neatly sealed, into an active crime scene, with these maps as the primary evidence laid out on the table, waiting for new detectives to connect them. This brings our investigation of 30 individual artifacts to its necessary close, and opens the door to the final, synthesizing question. Having walked this gallery of cartographic ghosts, what coherent picture can we now assemble from the puzzle? So what emerges from this gallery of cartographic ghosts is not a simple answer, but a magnificent, tangled tapestry. After walking through 30 specific maps, from the clay of Babylon to the vellum globes of Nuremberg, a single, unified theory feels too small. The evidence points not to one lost civilization, but to a complex, interwoven story of human endeavor across time. It is a story of remarkable ancient voyages whose logs have turned to dust, of diligent scribes in monasteries and royal libraries who copied precious data for 1,000 years without fully understanding it. It is the story of myth blending seamlessly with real sailor reports, where a legend of a golden city might be stitched onto the accurate coastline of a real river delta. And yes, it is also a story of occasional, brilliant guesswork, where a scholar's elegant theory about continental balance accidentally sketched the outline of a truth hidden under miles of ice. The collective power of these maps lies in what they reveal about us, not just about the world. They are monuments to a timeless human drive, the insatiable curiosity to look over the next horizon and make a record of what is there. That impulse burned in the hearts of Phoenician captains navigating by the stars as surely as it did in Renaissance princes funding caravels. These artifacts challenge a very modern kind of hubris, the idea that our current age holds a complete monopoly on geographical knowledge. They whisper that discovery is not a linear march, but a cycle of finding, forgetting, and rediscovering. Great libraries fall, empires crumble, and with them, whole atlases of understanding can vanish, leaving behind only cryptic fragments in later works. The Piri Reis map is not a singular anomaly. It is one survivor of a great shipwreck of knowledge. The Portolan charts are not a sudden invention. They are the polished final form of 1,000 whispered sailing directions passed from father to son. The Kangnido is not a fantasy. It is a snapshot of a global information network that hummed with activity centuries before European ships rounded the Cape of Good Hope. This synthesized view transforms our relationship with history itself. We stop asking which single theory is correct and begin to appreciate how all these forces work together. A real coastline from a Minoan trader's chart could be copied by a Greek geometer, then misinterpreted by a medieval monk who added a biblical monster nearby, only to be faithfully redrawn by an Ottoman admiral who noted its strange accuracy. The tapestry is woven from threads of hard data, threads of cultural belief, and threads of pure human error, all inseparable after centuries. This richer, more nuanced picture does not solve the mystery. It deepens it into something more profound. It asks us to hold two truths at once, to celebrate the incredible achievements of known explorers while leaving room in our imagination for those whose names are lost to us, whose journeys are remembered only as a faint, perfect line on a piece of parchment that should not exist. Having woven this tapestry from 30 individual threads, we are left standing before it with a final, inevitable question. What does this grand, reassembled picture ultimately mean for our understanding of who we are and where we come from?